Greetings from Tokyo, I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, you and I are going to paint Commander Farsight. Let's go. Thanks for joining me in the studio. This week, you and I are going to paint T'au Commander Farsight. But first, I want to talk very briefly about sakura, or cherry blossoms. Now, of course, Japan is famous the world over for its sakura, or cherry blossoms, and every spring, around the end of March or the first week of April, you get an annual bloom, depending on how warm or cold the winter was leading up to it. As is tradition throughout all of Japan and not just Tokyo, families often find a nice, quiet, secluded park or other spot to have hanami, which is like a picnic under the sakura when they're in full bloom at the end of the month. At this point of the year, the weather has warmed up a bit, and wearing a light jacket or sweater, you can enjoy a picnic bento or boxed lunch under the sakura as the petals slowly fall like snow. If you do plan on coming to Japan, I highly recommend timing your visit at the end of March or early April in order to see the sakura at full bloom. You won't regret it. Well, that's enough of me promoting Japan as a tourist destination for sakura viewing. Let's talk about Farsight. Now, oddly, in Japan, the land of mecha like Gundam and Evangelion, actually got the release of Commander Farsight 8 months after the rest of the world. Fortunately, I was able to get my hands on the model eventually, but like everything in my pile of shame, it sat there for more than a year before I actually got to it. So let me show you how I built and painted Commander Farsight. I had originally intended to complete this model for September, but was working on my large Titus statue. The kit goes together pretty easily, but here on the scenic rock, there's a bit of a nasty seam, so we're going to use some sprue goo. That's melted sprue bits in glue, and we'll use that to sort of weld the seam together. And when that fully dries, you can just scrape and sand that down so that no seam is visible. The rest of the model went together pretty easily. Honestly, at this point, these Games Workshop kits are just really well engineered and designed. I'm using Tamiya Thin here. It's possibly the best glue in the hobby. The brush applicators you can see here lets you place it exactly where you want it to be, and it sets really quickly for a plastic glue. Now, the one part of the model that's not great is this arm socket. Look at those tiny little divots in the socket and the tiny little ball joints. It's a bit fussy. You might struggle here. Just, try and be patient. And once I got it together, it was time to apply our primer coat. Here, as always, we're using Vallejo polyurethane primer through an airbrush. And then I'm going to use a white primer on top of that. Now, I didn't adjust my flow properly. It's a little splattery here, but honestly, that doesn't matter. We just want to make sure there's a white, so when we put this red down, it's really vibrant and it comes through. You apply that red over a black, and it's going to be much more desaturated looking. Now, once I've got my base red down, I'm going to go through with another red here. This is called Vallejo Bloody Red, and I'll put that on the top surfaces of the model in order to sort of give it some volume and shape. We want the bottom sides of the shapes to fall into shadow, like deeper reds in the black primer that we've left underneath. And then we want the top sides to have that really vibrant, punchy red. Now, on the base here, I've applied some texture paste around the rock and some additional pebbles and cork stones, and we'll go through and use a couple different browns here. I'm not looking for perfect coverage here because we're going to use a few different browns, some sort of warmer browns, some colder browns. Nothing is exactly one brown color, right? We want to work a couple different ones in here. So I've mixed some purple into this brown to give it that weird, in the desert, the shadows always sort of seem a bit purplish, and it gives it this really subtle gradient. Once we've got our base colors down, we're going to go ahead and apply a wash across the entire base. This is Games Workshop's Agrax Earthshade mixed with a healthy dose of Lamian Medium. I just think it's a little too potent straight out of the pot, so we'll cut it with some of that medium. It's also going to make it flow better over the recesses and details. I've kept the head separately here because I'm going to paint it white, and we don't want to get overspray on the model. And speaking of that, I wanted the blaster to be white, so I went ahead and masked a bunch off. We've got a little overspray there. It's fine. We'll retouch. The hand's got to be painted metallic black anyway. And speaking of metallics, here on the blade, I'm using Army Painter Fanatic plate mail metal. It's possibly my new favorite metallic paint. It is sort of surpassed the Lead Belcher as my absolute favorite. And we're just going to go ahead and get a little bit of that. You'll see here the new Army Painter Fanatic paint range, the metallics especially, are really great, and the coverage here, it's just exceptional. The shield that he bears on his left arm has a fair amount of detail on it, and some of it's supposed to be white. And we've got a red base here, so we need to work up from that. It wouldn't be smart to try and just put white right on top of this. You'd need too many coats, and white paints are notorious for getting clumpy and chalky. So we'll start with a cold gray, and then here I'm using Corax white. Now it looks like we've worked up to a white here, but this is actually a very, very light gray. It has really great coverage, so we'll do that as our intermediate step, and then finally we'll hit that with a real pure white. Once we've got our white down, we'll go through and get these black details. Here, I'm just using the side of the brush, right? And I'm sort of allowing the model to paint itself, so to speak. If we use this sort of side technique with the brush, it's going to catch those edges and shapes and give us some really clean lines and define those raised parts of the model that Games Workshop has put in there. And as you can see, we can use the same technique on the letters here, even though they're very small. We use the side of the brush to just sort of scrape the paint along and get that detail. On the blade, I wanted it to look like it was glowing from the inside with power, so I've dropped some white ink in there, and then I just dried my brush off and wicked away some of the excess so you could still see the details. I did the same thing on these heat coils on the jetpacks, and then we'll go through, and once the white ink dries, we'll re-hit those highlights with that powdered blue. It's time to start blocking in our metallics all around the model. Here I'm using that Platinel metal that we talked about, but I've cut it with a little bit of black to darken it up. And we're just going to carefully work our way around the model, applying this any place where we need that metallic finish. The trick here is to be patient and careful as you work your way around the model. We don't want to get any of this on the red that we spent all that time airbrushing in. Once we've got our metallics laid down, we're going to go back to our base now that the wash has dried, and we're going to dry brush the surface with a light sandstone color in order to bring out the highlights, ridges, and details. For the alien plants, I'm just going to apply contrast wildwood straight from the pot over the branches and roots. It settles in really nicely. It does a great job of bringing out the details and highlights. Now for the blossoms, we're going to do something a little different. Instead of a traditional pink cherry blossom like you might see in Japan, we're going to do something a little alien, and we're going to make them powder blue. With the base complete, we're ready to go ahead and attach the figure to it. So we'll use some Revell Contact Pro, and there are these tiny little tabs hidden within the rock and some pegs on the feet. It actually seats in pretty easily and connects solidly. The next thing we'll do is apply his shield. There's this little divot where you can feel it snap in place. And now that we've got him on the base and I can put him into a proper holder, that allows me the control to go through and do the fine detailing, like edge highlighting the upper surfaces of the armor. Here I've just mixed some orange in with that red that we were using previously. I'm using a 000 brush, and I'm just using it to catch the highlights of the uppermost panels and help give the model some definition. Now once we've got everything edge highlighted, we're going to go through and put in some of the markings that are on the, I guess you would call these dorsal fins or ailerons, I'm not sure. But we're going to go through, we're going to use that Corax white first over the red, and then we'll touch that up with some pure white as well. Now for the head itself, I'm going to use this decal that was included in the kit. I have a separate tutorial on my channel for how to apply these. This one here, you see it hangs over the top of the armor a little bit once I've pressed it down with that paper towel, but that's fine. I'll go through with a really sharp razor blade and trim that off. And as you can see here, it's really clean. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to sponge chip these. We want it to look like some of the paint is worn off in battle. So we'll use a sponge and some red paint to chip those up. And then while we've got our sponges out, we're just going to go ahead and sponge chip the rest of the armor plates on the model with this dark gray to make it look like it's been banged up in battle, and it would get that sort of kind of wear and tear you would expect from being in the battlefield. We don't want our Commander Farsight to look like that he has just rolled off the assembly line. Now we're going to go ahead and recess shade the model. Here, I'm just using some Nuln oil from Games Workshop and a detail brush, and we're just putting that into all the major recesses and shadow areas to sort of help bring out the definition of the model. You can see I'm just using it straight out of the pot. I'm using a brush to apply it to the recesses and armor joins so it really sinks in there and starts to define those shapes. We don't want them to look perfect or flawless, so we'll go ahead and apply that to all the recesses. Now you'll notice my fancy nails here. One of my kids got a nail salon for Christmas, and Daddy was the very first customer, I'm proud to say. So I got myself a mani-pedi on Christmas Day. The sword goes together for final assembly, and one of the last things we need to do is attach the jump packs here. It's a little fiddly, but we got there. Well, there you have it, Commander Farsight painted up for our growing T'au army. I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my genuine pleasure to make and share it with you. If you'd like to support the channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. Help drive us to the front page of YouTube and grow our audience. We've only recently passed the 10,000 subscriber mark after 2 years of effort, and I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you again. If you'd like to support the channel in other ways, check out the Patreon linked in the description below. Now remember, joining at any level grants you access to our private Discord server where like-minded hobbyists help each other out every day with honest and kind feedback. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.